our biology. But either way, they would battle with other regions nearby in their dreams. So these witches and warlocks would wear certain outfits to bed, and because the clothing they were wearing had been charged all day, or I forget exactly the specifics of the ritual, but they would wear these battle outfits to bed and then in their dreams go and fight with other agrarian communities in the area over exactly what R. Marx just pointed out, the fertility cults, because there was sort of like this idea that the abundance or the fertility that the earth could offer was limited, and maybe, you know, if you couldn't beckon favor from the gods, well, you can maybe, you know, hurt your enemy so they don't get as much of that energy and more of it comes to you. I'm sure there's other justifications for it. Probably
is this what Hess and I think Hess and Crowley were doing? They were dressing up in these like robes with all these sigils on them and like kind of having a duel or something, like as like a chaos wizard, or I mean, I don't know.
And out of context, it's like, wow, like during World War II, two people who were loosely affiliated with either sides of the Axis and Ally powers were battling each other with occult symbols
behind the scenes
going on since
I got a story about that.
This is ancient time. Go ahead.
Right. So in World War II, the Nazis actually used dowsers as their means of hunting submarines. So they were using map dowsers, using the pendulums to find out where these submarines were. And they actually had a pretty good track record of doing it until Gerald Gardner was tasked by the British government to start doing cone of power rituals with his Wicca group. And so they were blocking the Nazi dowsers from finding these submarines. They also used dowsing to find El Duce in Italy, because they kept transferring them between these palaces, and they actually got an extraction team to pull, the dictator of Italy out using these map dowsers and trying to find his location.
That really makes you think, like, was the whole war done behind the scenes through all these certain like kind of,
this is more examples to demonstrate that point that you just brought out, Jules, and you made a great point. Like this is going on behind the scenes, and I'm here to tell you it's been going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. From what you mentioned, it was happening way earlier in these other kind of Germanic communities. Yeah, man. Napoleon,
in his great conquest, what was one of the things he did? He went to Egypt. He basically inspired the creation of what we now think of as Egyptology, because he sent so many of his skilled, learned, they didn't call them scientists at the time, but they were essentially scientists before scientists were recognized as scientists. And they studied Egypt, and they brought all these, illustrations back to different universities. And,
La description d'Égypte.
It was like this resurgence that in some ways, like, people might have heard about these mummy parties where they would take a mummy, these wealthy people who could afford to buy a mummy, they would unwrap it at a party. I mean, could you imagine?
They would drink the fluid from it, right?
Yeah, they would grind it up.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, they would grind
right
it up
now.
and sniff it. And there was this whole thing of,
that it's like catnip for rich people. That's like the rich people catnip, and they just roll in it, dead mummy dust, and fucking snort.
No, it was taken like medicine.
Right. That's wild, man.
Yeah.
Like medicine.
Marina Abramovich.
Oh my god!
Ritual where she gives you a fake human body to eat, and the ritual aspect of it, might have some medicinal value if you're in that state of mind. I mean, placebo is a powerful thing. Who knows what the hell she's adding to that cake mix?
Here's an angle. All the people who could afford to buy these mummies and consume them were probably in these bloodlines that go all the way back to Egypt.
Right?
They do go all the way back to Egypt. The priest of Ra.
They're eating their ancestors.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. I mean, that's ancestrophagy. That's very common, actually.
See, that's why that's why I'm glad I'm broke, is because if I was rich and I had to do this shit, I'd fucking kill myself. Like, really, I have to eat dead corpse, moldy, dusty ass, and
Of
like
your
No, they didn't see it like
and
that.
roll in it.
You would be
Didn't
so
see it like that.
culturally conditioned, like
you'd be
think about
conditioned,
it.
right?
Your whole life is mansions and fine dining, and you know you're so sick of like the most expensive plate any of us here could imagine buying at a restaurant that you're like, oh yeah, let's spice it up with charred bone from a tortured.
Yummy.
Say it because I don't know where this YouTube or this was going to go. Maybe YouTube, but God forbid. But
no.
We still do it today. Rhinoceros.
I thought you were going to say rice-a-roni. That would have been
Rice-a-roni. Yeah, that stuff is gross too.
They still do it today. So
right,
Headline up, man.
There's also
how you doing, Jules?
Chinese medicines and powders and starfish
Mellified
powder.
man.
Rhinoceros horn
also
actually protects against poison, so they usually make cups out of it. Those are things for like 3,000 years in China.
So
I did have a question for Mark, just really quick.
Cool.
I do too eventually.
Did you say that I'm probably going to say this wrong, but it was the Tuatha De Nan people?
Yes.
They were in and around that area before like Germany was like popping off hard, or they were like trying to settle that area, or what were they?
So to my memory, which could be a little faulty, there were a group of people that we remember as the Fomorians, and they actually sound a lot more like what we now think of as Sasquatch, maybe what we would have called in the past giants or Nephilim. And then there was a counterpart to the Fomorians who were battling the Fomorians, and they had a different name, but I think Tuatha De Danann is kind of like a term that falsely gets used to call these people, but really like that's more like you wouldn't call the Lord of the Rings characters, those guys from the Lord of the Rings, you'd call them hobbits, right? Or the wizard, right? So kind of like that. Like this, I think the Tuatha De Danann is like the legend itself, and then there are characters within it that are these people that, according to the legend, came from the other world. Okay, now
and return to it.
What's that?
And return to it.
Right. Well, and
they lost the battle that left the Picts in Ireland. Yeah. So they lost the last battle. That's why it's called the last battle of the Sith. And they retreated to their dimension.
And there's some also links with them to the Tower of Babel as well.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that too. It's like they're the ancient bloodliners, right? They're like the ones people assume are some type of Nephilim type beings, magical beings, and I don't know. I mean, I think some of them stuck around. I think we got traces of them.
Think about it like this: we have all these, we'll call them runic legends, and the Tuatha De Danann in this story is kind of in that culture of Celtic, Gaul, the Nordic, and the fusion of those people into what became kind of this idea of a German person, right? All of that was floating around in the folklore, and then they start mixing and intermingling with the Moors and the Jews and the Arabs, and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys have the same stories. Like, you guys are talking about these beings too. So this is kind of where some of the people were like, all right, let's consolidate this, right? And I'm not saying that was right, because a lot of people were killed under the cross and a sword, the whole Christianization of Europe, and we still have that going on in some ways today with what's going on in Gaza. So we don't need to get super political, but yeah, there's definitely some implications that still carry through to this day. But to get it all back to this idea that warfare and occultism might be somehow connected, like if you go back to the furthest reaches of what warfare was, every single general who was worth his salt had a mystic, a seer, a diviner, an astronomer. Exactly. Yeah, they all relied on the
Reagan
German
had like 12 of them in the White House, dude. I'm pretty sure he had 10 or 12 astronomers in the White House.
One for each zodiac.
He had one astrologer, and that was
astrologer. Sorry,
Reagan had Hollywood astrologers. This is a little different, but maybe some Scientology mixed in there too. So,
that Hollywood astrologer, though, she's the one who advised them on the Just Say No campaign and going really hard on drugs, because his whole campaign was kind of falling apart because people saw how he was deteriorating physically. And so his astrologer suggested, you need a cause that everybody can rally around. And that's when they started this Just Say No campaign, because it was astrologically significant.
So,
well, somebody brought up the other day how like Mary Todd Lincoln was in there conjuring freaking dead corpses and shit too. I mean, they were all kind of into that stuff, but it's kind of like what Mark was saying. If you go back past the Nazis and you go back past like all the sensationalized stuff, all of this has its roots in some type of like ancient occultism, like ancient
Odinic mysteries,
type
the
shit.
Druidic mysteries and stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask next.
Mark, I have a question for Mark. Did you have any your research look at a specific location in Germany as we're stopping? Because in some of the work that Nick and I did, we were noticing how some of these very notorious and influential occultists, Michael Myers, Henry Coonroth was the guy who basically, Yates referred to him as the link between John Dee and Rosicrucianism, because he was able to tie in, Pythagorean, alchemy, Kabbalah, all that. Is there a specific area in Germany where they would congregate?
Are you talking about Francis Yates?
No.
Yates, who'd you say?
Yates had done an analysis on Heinrich Coonroth.
Oh, okay, okay, interesting. That name is new to me. But Berlin.
I would say this: when you look at the Baphomet, it came from Heinrich Coonroth.
Okay,
it didn't come from Levi.
No, Levi even quotes in his book that he took the image from Manus Hieroglyphica, Heinrich Coonroth's writing.
Wow.
I know about Coonroth, so I have to correct myself on my own show then.
Yeah, there's something I wanted to
go ahead,
get into real quick. Just want to sorry, it's my show. I'm just trying to speak. I'm just busting your balls more. I'm glad you mentioned the Rosicrucians, because I wasn't exactly sure how far back you were going to go. And like Lisa kind of even just touched on it right now. And this is, I kind of wanted to go back to where we were, maybe even a little bit earlier. And it's just a thing with Germany, or where it was. I could even say, go back to the 1400s. You got Johannes Trithemius, you got Paracelsus, and you got Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa out there. Then into like the 1500s, you get John Dee, Heinrich Coonroth, Michael Myers, somebody we covered too. He was a Rosicrucian like apologist. Then you get like Jacob Bohm, Johannes, Andre, and I think Robert Flood was out there too. Blah blah blah. You get all these people. You get all these people out in that, like, either they were from there or they specifically went there.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is there like
good point
up with Germany in general? Is there something to do with the land? Is there a different understanding? Because like, those people that even mentioned that are huge in alchemy.
Nick, you're spot on, and it helps me answer L's question, because that was a great question too. And still I'm looking at his Wikipedia page. I'd never seen him before, but he was a disciple of Paracelsus, which was another person in that realm. It says they were in Dresden, which was bombed terribly during, I think, World War II. Yeah, so they were trying to destroy as much as they could there. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a spot. But Prague is another big one, although not in Germany today. Back then, it was a little maybe more accessible. And again, the Holy Roman Empire was kind of centered there. So a lot of alchemy and this kind of occultism was there. But all of this to say, again, remember this concept of the university and how it sort of was born in this melting pot that became Germany, the land area that we now know as Germany. There was a legend in this region of the school of the Solimandre. And I might not be saying that the way the Germans would have said it, but essentially this legend was that every, full moon, once a year, I think it would have been maybe on Beltane around Halloween, 13 men would be recruited into the forests, and the devil himself would teach them the magical arts. And this legend was pervasive for more than a couple centuries. It was kind of like a, hey, be careful where you go in the woods, because there's a school of wizards and warlocks taught by the devil himself. Now we can say, okay, maybe there's some metaphysical portal or some kind of supernatural explanation there, or this was some sort of offshoot of a much older cult that survived the collapse of the Roman Empire. Mithraism was a big, the state cult of Rome, and had a lot of these sort of fertility rituals and other things that have made their way into our culture today. The carnival, I mean, the the fact that we celebrate Christmas on what is it? What's the Roman holiday where they like go crazy?
Saturnalia?
Yeah, Saturnalia. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, Saturnalia, which again connects back to this skull and bones idea and death. The Saturn is like the planet of death, and there's this kind of concept that we can bring the savior back if we all destroy the world. This like millennialism concept that a lot of extreme Christian sects get into. They get into this concept that the apocalypse is happening now, the Armageddon is happening now. You've seen people, maybe not anymore, but I remember growing up, occasionally someone would leave a pamphlet on your door or something, Jehovah Witness or what have you, and it would be like, look at the end times, they're happening now, right?
Still the same.
Mark,
yeah,
up in your area,
Yeah.
they have the Millerites, and the Millerites were this sect of people who in the 1840s decided that Jesus was coming back, and so they sold all of their stuff. And when they did, they ended up, losing out. Obviously, he didn't come back, and so they ended up all joining the Mormons and moving out to Utah. So, I mean, that's a pretty good example right there.
Well, you brought up something interesting, actually, Headless, a few minutes ago about angles. So I actually have 3 of them that I wrote down, because obviously all things that arise in materiality arise in time. So Mark also brought up Saturn. Saturn's actually not the planet of death, Mark. I just want to correct the record on this. Mars is really the planet of death. And this is more traditional Vedic understanding. So I wanted to ask you about chronology. So this obviously plays off of Lisa's and Nick's sort of point, because the chronology for what is codified, like what you're calling runic text, that didn't happen until over 1,200 years after the more, we'll say, we'll call them Central Asian texts. So for occultism, what came about in runic language is extremely late in comparison, as well as the Triglav god. So I thought this was really interesting to go off Lisa's point of the Baphomet figure, because there's a Pomeranian deity who looks a lot like Shiva. Shiva sometimes depicted with 3 heads. He really has 5, but 3 and Saturn kind of go together. So so if you I don't know if you know about that, but his cult actually only ended in the same time, so like the 1300s, that the runic text actually arose. So I think that's really interesting. And by this time, India had fully converted away from the Vedas into the Puranic Hinduism. And so that is a rejection of the Vedic yajna, like the horse, eagle, human sacrifice. So all of that is rejected, and it becomes more about well, bhakti's a little bit later in the 1700s, but like things like that. Like it's more ritualistic, a little more it's more personal with the deity. It's not so state ritual. But I think that also my last point is about the Arab Renaissance. So this is a contentious issue in Central Asian studies simply because the Arabs, quote unquote, who really innovated were actually Mughalized Indians. So the Mughalized rulers of India during this Puranic period, they were the ones who were synthesizing the Vedic texts, often, or not Vedic, excuse me, Tantric texts, Puranic astrology texts, and the Shastras, sometimes by way of Iran, but usually by way of India and the Himalayas, especially. So I just think that's really interesting because you mentioned the runes. Obviously, we have this idea in Sanskrit of the bijas, the seed syllables. Kabbalah has the sephra, their negative space, so it's like the unmanifest sound.
Well, and that reminds me of well, and I should say thank you because I just learned a few things there for sure. And no, I didn't know some of that. I think I'm doing my best to paint more of a broad strokes of the history so people can have some more key concepts to then do their own research and verify the things that I'm saying because it's not all perfect. I don't have a degree in this. I'm sure an academic would probably laugh at what I'm saying, but either way, yeah, very interesting point. And I think Germany or this region that became known as Germany was very much in this auspicious area where it could garner that influence from that part of the world, Asia, Central Asia, and beyond, before the rest of Western Europe could. And because of that, you see this what we now think of as like when Eastern mysticism starts to filter into European culture and really, creates what then becomes, in some ways, the proto New Age, right? This theosophy movement where people are kind of blending things from different religions and supernatural belief systems together into this. Sorry, there's some bikers across the street interrupting me. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this whole conversation. So any clarifications that any of you have are welcome from me.
Well, Mark, I just wanted to ask a question because I might be wrong here. Because I see we've been talking about Germanic occultism, and I haven't heard a word about the Norse. So it all starts there. So about 500 BC, maybe earlier still. So they expanded all the way into Russia. They had trade routes going back and forward. They assimilated and produced most of their mythology into the Russian and vice versa. So and the runes were born there.
Right.
So they're in the Norse area. So how do you relate all of this, like Yggdrasil, Odin, Gilgamund, Ragnarok?
I'm glad you raised that point because I did mention it, but I probably just glossed over it. But that is the foundation of what we consider now paganism in this area, right? Nowadays, it's just kind of glossed over. Oh, they were pagans. But you're right. It was a Nordic fusion of the basis was this Nordic ideology. And as it moved south, things got added into it, right? The Roman and Greek cultures sort of fused with this. But these guys that we think of as Teutonic Knights, I mean, if you were to put them in a lineup, you might think they were Vikings because of the way they dress, the weapons. So yeah, the cultural influences and connections were definitely there. It was the southern extent of that Nordic culture. So absolutely, but it was very much influenced by the moving eastward and westward in that part of Germany, or now Germany, whereas Scandinavia was much more isolated, right? So their culture still retains a lot of that, whereas was diffused and gold. It was diffused into the. Oh yeah, it's very cold. Yeah, absolutely. But it was more so diffused into what happened as things changed throughout what became the Industrial Revolution, World Wars. I mean, one of
Sure.
the countries in Scandinavia
And
is
how
still a monarchy, so not much has changed up there.
so how do you associate the fact that some organizations that I don't know the name, at least you might know, that used elements like Saint Germain, for instance, to reorganize the whole Central Europe into new kingdoms, new kings, new rules, deposing great kings and substituting by new kings, and reorganizing Germany as we see it today, much earlier than the First World War. How do you see that? Who to you was behind the scenes and controlling these real agents, not like 007, but real agents on the field that were dominating this scenario?
Well, I think the people of this portion of Europe had some catching up to do, in a sense, right? Because as the great pilgrims left Europe and went to America and the revolution happened, obviously Freemasonry and these occult groups had made their way all across Europe by then, but they have their origins in this area, right? So the people in this area, after all these wars going on, I mean, the 19th century and the 18th century, there were a lot of wars in Europe going on at different periods with different factions of people. And through all this upheaval, you have the American Revolution that happens. Before that, you have what happens in England, where they create the Parliament and so on and so forth. The monarchy comes back, right? The French, they decapitate their monarchy. They have a revolution. So this type of thinking, this kind of idea, like we should change things and in a radical way, this was looming on this area, which was obviously a source of anxiety for the powers that be. These smaller, in comparison to France and United States and the United Kingdom, I don't know that it was called that then yet, but England, they were smaller in comparison and fighting
Yeah,
among
Prussia wasn't that big, so
right. Well, and
The British,
again, there's this revolutionary sentiment going on that's changing the whole world. So you have this balance of, you have some groups who are trying to, again, kind of secretly keep the old world establishment influential, while at the same time trying to figure out what to do with all these revolutionaries. And some people would argue that some of the subsequent revolutions that affected, Russia in a major way, Germany in a major way, were artificially, sort of fomented by people on the perimeter, not necessarily the countries that ultimately fell victim to these cultural movements. It's very hard to pin down. It's very murky. That's why the idea of the Illuminati is so pervasive. But if I had to answer your question as precisely as I could, I would look to the University of Ingolstadt. I would look to the players in Berlin at the time around, this very crucial time period where, again, they're sort of reacting to what's gone on in America and France. And they're like, all right, what are we going to do? And the Illuminati is created. It was a short-lived venture,
this is
apparently.
Louis XIV and Louis XV. So against Belgium, against England, the reorganization of Prussia into Germany, proto country, the elimination of kings. This is much earlier than that. So it precedes all that. These organizations were already on the field, programming what we have today. Let's put it this way. So I was just curious if you have a name for that organization, because that has eluded me on my research.
No. And I think you might have a lot more to offer in this topic than I do, because, I'm going into this trying to figure out, what's going on with Skull and Bones. And then I run into, like I said, this dump truck of information that is Occult Germany. So yeah, there's a lot. And I don't know if you have a culprit.
I did want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It should be pointed out, though, that in World War I, Europe wiped out 9 out of 10 of their aristocrats. So it was severely limited by the time that World War II came around, and they didn't really have any of that kind of leadership. So they were all looking for a new leader.
And this kind of brings me to maybe answer Ricardo's question a little bit better too. Not my own work or research, but I recently was listening to Joe Atwill talk on the Higher Side Chats, and I believe in this conversation he mentioned that by the time of World War I, most of the monarchs in Europe were related in some way to Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria was the German infiltration of the English monarchy in many ways. So you have those powers that be who are stressed out in their revolutionary time. They're like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? We create these sort of secret societies, and you sort of see them behind the scenes amalgamate their powers into these nations that then become these groups that, I think might be best named as the Bilderbergs, right? If we're talking about Europe, I mean, the Bilderbergs would probably be the people that are retaining the bloodline. That's, I mean, a little bit of a cop out because I haven't researched that myself to the nth degree, but yeah, it's a strange web of history. But I think when you look at England and that age of imperialism, there's a strong German connection. Even in America, a lot of the industry in America was done by German immigrants.
Well, that's where the Vlad the Impaler, that whole
Vlad Dracul is
comes from, right? It's from
grandpa aunt of Prince Charles.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Grandpa aunt, no, uncle, grandparent, uncle of Prince Charles.
But through the Germanic bloodline, right? Okay.
They were all Germanic. So
right. Okay.
So I was going to say, when you get into this whole prehistory of kind of Germania, you also get within the Balder worship of Balder the Beautiful. You have the fire festivals that generally took place on June 23rd, and they would roll these wagon wheels on fire down the hills, and they would have all these. This is where we get the maypole. And the Hedge King, where basically they would bake the bread like you get at Mardi Gras that has the little baby in it, and whoever gets the baby is the king for the day. And they would basically, treat this person extravagantly, give him the greatest food, the best drinks, all the women, and then at the end of the day, he would be the sacrifice that they would basically for the fertility of the coming grow season. And then when you go later and you get into like the Volk of the Nazis, they're kind of hearkening back to this this time. But as far as the people kind of behind the scenes that were very much building the sacred spaces, they were the Zimmerman, which were equivalent to the cathedral builders. So you have this whole school of mystics that are kind of creating these woodland type elven structures that look,
Mark,
go ahead.
Robbie, I just gotta throw this in there. So what you're talking about is Beltane. That's the festival when this is going on.
That's May 1st, right?
Yeah, Beltane. That's where it comes from. It comes from Baal,
like
because it in the Bronze Age, the Phoenicians had to get their tin from England, so they had a connection all the way back there. So all of this stuff coming out, there you go, Baal Hamon later on in Carthage. All of this stuff comes through that Carthaginian / and again, you were just talking about these builders. That's Byblos. That's one of the main cities of Phoenicia.
And that's where the Gibbon were that King Hiram called up to go work on Solomon's temple.
The mighty men. Right.
All in there. And if you go to Irish mythology, it's all right there. They've almost got the entire
the Canaanites
Bible
and the Phoenicians and
the Book of Wars, like you were talking about.
Yeah, back to Ham, basically.
Forgive me, I'm going to end really quickly. But to go back to my point, that I think Germany, and Mark, I think this is extremely important research. I genuinely believe that. And so the German occultism research that you're presenting today, I think, is extremely important, talked about and discussed, because Germany was not just the layover between England to Austria to go visit Rudolph, who was a patron of all of the mystics and occultists. And I think he kind of collected them all there. When you look at some of the most influential occultist, mystics, alchemists across the board, they are German. They are from Germany. They were educated in Germany. And then you look at the inventors. You look at the people that have come up with physics, particle physics, quantum physics, string theory.
The Big Bang.
Yeah, I'm glad you're making that point, because that's what I found with Yale University too, in a microcosm kind of way. And I just talked to somebody today about Rudolf Diesel, another German, who I don't think he was actually raised in Germany, but yeah, very interesting character. Sorry to interrupt you, Elle, but yeah, I'm just
no, not at all. But
thing,
how influential not only their physics throughout the world and throughout history, but their mathematics, but their chemistry.
Yeah,
their,
I was going to say
art,
math
their
that we've
art,
gotten.
everything. And it is almost, sadly to say, the measuring stick.
Yeah.
In terms of influence globally.
It is no coincidence that the Dresden Library is perhaps one of the few that can compete with the Vatican Library, and they have a collection of restricted books that are exposed in a large structure in the middle of the building and protected by glass and tempered. And
Dresden contains all the codices from.
In Dresden, they burned to the ground. They said the fire was hotter than the sun, than the surface of the sun, in those mass bombings.
Sure. Look, they just eliminated all the dissidents within their bloodlines and those that they considered that were bastards or not pure, and they concentrated all this bloodline into one single group and then spread it all over Europe to regain control to one single bloodline, because it has been spreading from chieftains and warlords and whatnot. So that's why they took all the measures they could to eliminate everyone, and especially those that were not in agreement with this group that no one knows the name, that had these agents in the field to reorganize the history of Europe.
And that is what they were doing.
Yeah, Casanova was one of them.
Yeah.
So
it was a huge threat to Europe itself, as far as just the rise, and then you get into the Kaiser and the size of his army, and the fact that they said that when he told his army to start marching, if he immediately gave the order to stop, it would take 2 weeks once the machine started turning. It's just the immensity of this thing that Europe was very, very threatened by.
Sure, but it was all connected somehow, because we know that individuals like, I repeat, Saint-Germain and Giacomo, that is more commonly known as Casanova, their studies went all over the place to study with these mystics and this enlightened people, inclusively into the Library of the Vatican. When we know this, because Casanova told the Pope, "Look, I like this stuff and all, but please don't make me go there, because I'm not interested in reading any of that." He was more interested in women and stuff. But he played his part. But they all go into all these places. So to say that the Vatican was against these groups is not correct, because they went all over the place. It's all for show, basically, because these associations were infiltrated everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and people often point at the Jesuits as a big, boogeyman. I don't think there's
the Black Pope still in charge in the Vatican.
I think that's a well aimed, claim that the Jesuits might be behind some of that. The University of Ingolstadt is where I believe the Jesuits were formed or gained steam, and that was in Germany. But yeah, Saint Germain's an interesting character. I just had a guy on my podcast who, his grandparents, when he was a kid, told him that, one day this Saint Germain character is going to be very important to you. And then he later learns that, as he got older, he learns that in his family, somebody he was related to was a Freemason at the lodge in St. Petersburg, Russia. and there they had Saint Germain's triangular manuscript, and this is literally a triangular shaped book, and it's written
I have
in.
it. If anyone wants it, I can share it.
Oh yeah, wow, okay. Do you have your own copy?
No, I have a pretty good scan of the original.
Oh wow, yeah, please send that to me. I'll send you my email in the chat. But yeah, I talked to the guy who basically deciphered it and then published it in some form through Ouroboros Press. So there's copies of it out there. It's not available anymore, but I'm sure there's digital copies too. But yeah, it's fascinating because one of the aspects of this triangular manuscript is that it tells you how to become wealthy, and it might even tell you how to become immortal, right? Because that's the legend
Sure.
with
Saint Germain.
he could live
Well-
an extended life, or maybe even control his reincarnation,
Well,
right? There's
That's what I think.
Saint Germain once told Louis the 14 that people often say that I'm 600 years old, and I like to hear they say those ridiculous things. But in truth, I am much older than I look. And I can also tell you this: it is not a normal person, because he did it many times in public, to write a love letter with his right hand and to write a treaty on alchemy with his left hand.
Yeah.
Or he would write with his both hands the exactly same thing, and when they put it to candlelight, you could not say which one was made by which one. You cannot distinguish it. He's
Abraham
spoken
Lincoln.
more than 50 languages,
Yeah.
including Chinese, Arab, native languages that were very few people knew. He could appear. Sorry, go on.
Wasn't he also said to be psychic and would tell people, their things about them that he wasn't supposed to know? And
yeah, look, he managed to influence kings because he was not a fraud, as most people said. Because, for instance, the father, I think the father of I did this paper long ago, so I might not be thinking it right, but he used to go to the palace and to the either to Louis. I think it's the father of Louis XIV or Louis XIV. I'm not sure, but he demonstrated how he transmuted anything that anyone gave him into gold, into a quickly prepared lab. So they give him vast areas for him to be his estate or his lab. Everyone wants it. So he was speaking at the same time with two parties that were at war one another, and he was freely going from one country to another, which was not possible, for instance. So
it's interesting. A stream of the conversation and, of course, of the occult is the power of the mind and telepathy, and with the World War II phenomena of them trying to influence each other, the outcomes of the battle. This is and 007, of course, we get from John Dee, who was very much a psychic figure, and Odin, of course. One could argue that a big part of Odinism would be a psychic phenomena using the mind, the third eye, whole thing. And Lisa, when you brought up the idea of them also studying the space-time continuum and so forth, and the high-end physics, it reminds me of all that power of the mind too. But also we see that really in the Cold War, they were using the whole remote viewing groups and people to engage in espionage and information, and who knows what all else they're doing now with the different technological features fused with the mind. So it's really interesting, this stream, psychic, telepathic power, and sometimes this exceptional mental performance really seems to be a part of all these groups.
When we like to focus on that the Germans helped us develop our aeronautics or our physics, we also have to remember that Russia also took key players from Germany as well. And so developing their physics, their aeronautics, their space program. And so again, the influence, it goes across the board. And the other thing that I want to say, it wasn't just Oppenheimer that had the technology for the atom bomb. Heisenberg also knew it. He told Niels Bohr he knew it. It just Hitler didn't want to do the Jew science, so he didn't let him build it. So that's the only reason that they didn't have that like we did. But he knew it. He was his right-hand scientist. So they knew, and Oppenheimer was German. So, I mean,
well, they were doing it through heavy water instead of doing it through uranium. So I think that was the difference. But they were still right about the heavy water because that's what the atom or the H bombs are. So,
but to the point of the amount of intelligence, and not to say they're a superior race, by no means, I'm not saying that, but the amount of intelligence that was coming out of Germany from the occult side, from the historical occult mystical side, is extremely influential in later secret societies. And
So
to shape all that.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at Goethe, as far as, I mean, he was said to be a member of the Illuminati, but as far as just his stories that he wrote, the Mickey Mouse, as far as the Magician's Apprentice, that's a Goethe story. The Faust, as far as and he gets into homunculuses, and he wrote the first story.
Oh, wow.
He wrote.
I'm got the reminder on that, and that to just while we're here, thank you for bringing this up again, because I wanted to mention this before, but this whole concept of selling your soul to the devil for sort of material gain, this is like the major takeaway of Faust.
But who is this devil who was in the middle of the woods and he's everywhere? Who is this devil? Is it a name just for normal people? Say, ooh, that's bad. Don't go there.
Yeah.
Is it the Green Man?
What is interesting
in the woods?
Well, and I think that's kind of the point, is like they're thumbing their nose at the uninitiated. Like for the uninitiated, Halloween is scary and oh no, so much fright and blood and gore, Halloween movies. But for the initiated, it's another holiday that, boosts their abundance and allows them to participate in, however they see the world in a more whole way.
According to Randall Carlson, Halloween has or All Saints Day, or the Day of the Dead, has his basis on the Younger Dryas. So it was extermination of most of mankind, and it's kept his memory, although it changed his format and its name, but it still remains as the Day of the Dead. It was the time when most people lost everyone. Let's put it that way. So it might be also connected to that.
That point, great. But on the larger point of what occultism means to the general public versus what it means to the power elite, or the people who we speculate about on podcasts like this, I think, again, like the power players, the types of people who send their children to Yale and then do well and go on to do well in life in these realms, they're initiated into this understanding. I think there's, universal aspects to it, in the sense that they kind of they're like Crowley, right? If you learn about Crowley, he kind of took from all these different things and was trying to find the truth in all of it. It was kind of egalitarian in that sense. Obviously, there was a lot of things you could
subverted some of it.
Crowley did wrong and subverted it, but of course he saw the universalism in a lot of these things, and I think that's kind of how the elites play it today. Like they're economical in the sense that they know it works. They don't care if they need Tai Chi or Teutonic magic or shamanism to do it. They know it works, and if they can use that against people who don't know it works, or even better, laugh at the idea that it works, well, now they're in kind of a cushy situation where, again, they send their kids to the right education where these ideas are maybe entrained in them in subtle ways. Whereas for the public, people like myself who went to public school, the opposite is true, in most cases, where they sort of entrain you to laugh at these sort of things and to think in a material, reductionist sort of way. Yeah, this Prussian system. So there's roots in this European area. Again, German occultism is probably like a loose, way to describe it. But I think, yeah, there's very much through Yale University in America, a German influence that, when you consider yourself a conspiracy theorist and then you look at it, you're kind of like, wow, how does it all go back to this one place? And I think that's because Germany is very much like the United States in the sense that it's a new country, it's a new place, and a lot of people immigrated there at a key point in European history. So it
Mark,
became these intellectual
led
powers.
to migrate there.
Mark, if I can comment on that migratory pattern, that was all due to the close relationship that the United States had with Germany going back into the 1850s, because the number one migrant from Europe into America was German for a long period of time.
Yeah, my last name is German.
Until the Irish.
Yeah, I go back to one of the first waves of German people to go into America, and then Benjamin Franklin shipped a bunch of them up to Canada, and they became French Canadians. So yeah,
if you look at a demographic map of the United States, you see that the entire middle portion would all be Germanic peoples.
Yeah.
And so on the very little outside, you've got the New England people, and then there's a big blotch of New England people out in Utah, because that was the migration pattern during that whole trip out there. They came from New York and then deposited them out there. So it's kind of funny how you can track the history.
On the point of Germany and that area in particular, things had changed in a significant way in these periods leading up to World War I, and people were moving into cities more and more, right? So the cities in Germany really flourished, and that, to at least his earlier point, that's where you see these intellectual centers blossoming. And it's not that there's a superiority there, it's that there was a convenience for these people to go to these places, and then they became, like the way we talk about Silicon Valley with tech today, like it's a hotbed of those types of people.
You have, around the Rhine River right there was a major trade route that came through. So you have a huge accumulation of these merchants that are settling in almost this protected zone that kind of really allowed it to, grow, and a lot of these ideas to foment and come about,
There's a really great author who I've interviewed a couple times on my podcast who has these great maps of the entire world, and he uses rivers and studies the geometry of rivers. And to your point, rivers are where humans congregate, but you can learn a lot about just the energetic patterns of culture and how things flow. To your point, Headless Giant, about the way people move on the earth through rivers. And yeah, I encourage anyone to look at Peter Shampoo's work if you're interested in ley lines or just the energy centers of the land masses, because rivers in particular play a huge role, and not just in the economical and practical functions. Like in America, the heart and soul of the East Coast is the Susquehanna River, which bleeds out into what becomes the Cape there, or I'm sorry, now I'm blanking on it, but where Washington D.C. is, Chesapeake Bay, and that Chesapeake Bay, Susquehanna River, these are ubiquitous. The modern computer in many ways was developed in Army labs on the Susquehanna River, the nuclear power plants there. I mean, all the different things that have developed along that river, you can really learn about America just by studying that one place. And the same is true for the Rhine, the Seine, any river that is on a major city is going to have a story like that. And that's kind of one of the other topics that I wanted to bring up. Not that we have time to get into it today, but Nick asked me hey, what would you want to talk about? And I threw 3 unconnected topics out there, and one of them was German occultism and the sort of I forget how I labeled it, but it's like psychogeography in a way, and I think that
you're gonna have to come back on.
Yeah, I'd love to. This is great. I mean, not that it's, but you guys are all awesome, so I appreciate it. hospitality.
Two quick things to touch on, Mark. So, one, you said the term earlier. We're talking about Nazis. You know that word Ashkenazi, right? And when you think about how certain people have controlled all sides of every war since all the way back to Napoleon, or probably farther back. But and even when you go and read Initiates of the Flame on like a PDF, you see the swastika and the Star of David on the same page. So we get into
you see that stuff
mysticism, you see the light and the dark, how Samael is a necessary evil, but also Himmler had a castle. And Michael Aquino, he's on video and he's like, here is Heinrich Himmler's dagger. I have a couple of his books. And it's like, this guy's in charge of our military. You know what I mean? Just saying.
Right. So, well, with Michael, not Michael Aquino, but who was it you were talking about there that he has the swords?
Heinrich
Himmler, right?
Yeah.
Himmler.
We talked about Hess.
Yeah, if you go and you read Himmler's works, he talks about how they crushed Prussia, and it's all related around the story of Snow White. And he talks about first they brought the girdle in, which were the tariffs and the taxes, and then the poison apple was when they brought the banking system in. And that's
fucking wild.
Goebbels has a whole Snow White analogy of the international banking system and how they basically crushed Prussia. Yeah,
I was actually gonna say something kind of along those lines. And I'm a big nerd about this kind of stuff, but I always compare everything to like movies. So just bear with me. But doesn't this story about like going all the way back about like the occultism in the runes and stuff? It reminds me of that Captain America movie where they're looking for the Tesseract and it's basically like Nazi stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they also put a bunch of like Project Paperclip stuff in there, but it's like they have to go all the way back to this like mausoleum thing, and it's got runes and the tree of life, and then they have to have this passcode, and then they get the Tesseract, and then like all the stuff with Captain America and the Red Skull is basically like Hitler, whatever. But they make this stuff so fantastical that when you learn about the reality of it, you're like, oh, well, that's some shit I saw in like a Marvel movie. That's not like, but it's all based on like the reality of things. I think there are a lot of Marvel movies. There's one in particular, I think it's an Iron Man one, where it's like the 9/11 stuff and the terrorists, and like, they are always putting just a little bit of our past
half truth.
Yeah, into that. So I just wanted to say that's what it reminded me of.
I was going to say there's in World War II there were factions that were against each other overtly, but actually had the same kind of end result that they were seeking. The Zionists wanted a new homeland, and the Germans wanted to get every Jew into one place. So at the end of World War II, at least, there were elements on both sides that kind of wanted the same thing. Please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say they actually minted a coin. It was an agreement that they had with Israel, and they were paying for the family and their entire estate to move to Israel. I can't remember the Havara agreement. Yeah. But Himmler actually minted a coin that has the swastika on one side and the Star of Rephesh, or the Star of, as the Zionists call it, the Star of David.
Sigil of Solomon, basically.
Well, according to the Masons, if you go back further, it's the 5-pointed star. There's a lot of
the Pentacle of Solomon. Man, you got to get back. I mean,
I know what you mean.
In Germany, there were two different spellings of National Socialist Nazi. Also, and there's said to be relationship to that with the one version was NASI.
So the NASI, the NASI is actually the high priest of the Sanhedrin. So, which is I find interesting. So,
well, in essence, I would say that they controlled not only the development of nations and the map, but they also controlled the development of technology and give it to those that they thought that they should be. For instance, just to finish, a particular part of the end of life of Saint-Germain, he was found in the city of Tournai, that was one of the last known Merovingian cities that was a star fort. And we find him here there dressed as a wizard, so in the 17th century, which was not very normal. And what he was developing the new alchemical. And if you go to German and read how they dominated the fabrication of hats, because at that time they were trying to find a way to produce hats of high quality and durability and so on. And this was an alchemical process that produced it. And I believe it was Saint-Germain that developed and then delivered them to the Germans, and that allow a huge amount of money to enter in that country. So even these small details were also dictated by these people and their organization. So they control everything from the little seed that was put in the ground to whatever was ruling the game.
Yeah, something you just reminded me of, Ricardo, and to that point, we might not think about this today much in our multicolored worlds, but Saint Germain was a genius when it came to dyes, and that was one of the main things he used his alchemical knowledge for, was dyeing fabrics, which at the time they only had a very limited palette to work with. And if you had something like purple, oh my God, like the kings would pay, out, up the wazoo, to put it politely, for purple or anything that can show that, oh, this guy's clearly like connected to God. Look how he's got purple. Like, where else do you see that other than an eggplant, right? So yeah, I think the
royal blue, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's something that's kind of, we think about it today like, oh, colors, big deal. But yeah, back then it was a huge change. Like for the times, people were probably only wearing like cotton colored, like pale white, brown leather, like that, red, because you could use blood as a dye, but that's about it,
And something I wanted to, I guess, get into, because I know we're gonna have to wrap it up eventually. It's getting late for you, Mark. But something I did want to make a point on, I think, when it does also come to Germanic occultism. When I had not to bring these people up again, but I know me and Lisa had mentioned them earlier. Something I do want to kind of, I think, make a point at, and it was because you had even mentioned Crowley earlier being kind of like, and I said, a master of synthesis, which I took from Toby Chappelle. It's not me; he coined that. But I really do think he was. And if people want to get, my opinion, get a good idea who he was actually inspired by, go look at the Gnostic saints. That's my opinion. Those are the people, because I've covered a bunch of them, and a lot of them I can see like, oh, that's where Crowley got this from. That's where Crowley got this from. That's where Crowley got this from. But now, and please bear with me. I'm trying to get a point here, and it's going to be a lot, but let me just get to it. A lot of these older occultists, again, you go back to Johannes Trithemius, Paracelsus, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, Heinrich Kunrath, Michael Meyer, Oswald Kroll, Robert Flood especially. You start looking at all these people that showed up in Germany or from in that area. A big thing with them that I don't see anymore, they were polymaths as well.
Yeah.
So besides being an occultist, they were also doing math. They were also, and this is a big thing that I keep bringing up, and I even think I spoke to you about this, Mark, about a year ago, and I think you said you were actually kind of interested in it. You're like, that could be something. I do think, because a lot of these people that I just mentioned, they even talk about the body, especially the brain and the eyeballs. And again, if you're a polymath, you're also going to be looking at music, which Robert Flood did.
Right.
Ones. You're going to be looking at the body. It's not just a few things. You're looking at probably about 6 or 7 different types of ways at looking at stuff. So, like, what I'm going to try to get at is that, like, back then you saw all these people incorporating music into their stuff and trying to understand it. Michael Myers was considered like the first multimedia person. You had an engraving, you had music that had to be played with it, and then you even had to read something and then meditate on what's going on. That guy, his shit was crazy. You have Robert Flood, who like basically came up with the monochord.
Right.
And he was huge with music. The guy was drawing your nerves, your blood, your eyeball, your brain. I mean, these people were not just like, I'm going to walk around with a crystal in my hand and throw some lavender over my shoulder. And
no.
You know, it's nothing like that. These people were like into so many things besides that. And for some reason that seems to get lost, or in my opinion, it's not lost. It's just hidden.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that anymore. The people that understand that stuff.
It's more ignored because it's not hidden.
Or it goes beyond the meme. So I don't even want to fucking think about it.
It's so valuable that it's controlled, you know, and I don't know that it's unanimously controlled. At least in Western culture, it's controlled to a certain degree through the class system. But think about wealthy people, like they're putting their children into rigorous courses to learn how to play instruments and learn athletics and do all these different things at very young ages because they want them to have a foundation to be successful. And you know, I'm sure everyone, you know, prays that they'll birth a prodigy, but that's not always the case. So they have to, you know, work with what they got. And that's why I think, yeah, getting them while they're young and putting them through these different schools that cost a lot of money makes a big difference. But whether or not music makes a difference, I think you're touching on a very important point about human consciousness and why chanting and music have always been major aspects of spiritual practices, going back to, you know, the first animal skin pulled over a stump, right? That was maybe the first drum, right? Like they heard that beat, they started dancing, they started moving in a way. I mean, who knows? That could just be some academic, but I think there's truth in that, and that's why, you know, you go to a monastery, you go to one of these Buddhist temples, and they have bells, they have chimes, they're chanting. It's all about the sound. So yeah, I think that these geniuses of the, you know, Enlightenment, pre-Enlightenment era that we've been talking about, you know, they were definitely using instruments and playing the piano and doing all these, as you pointed out, they were polymaths. But as to whether somebody figured out a surefire method for doing it, I'm more of an idealist in the sense that I think karma, absurdity, chance, these kind of the you know, humdrumness and mundanity of life all play into it, right? So I think, you know, it's all part of the human experience. I don't know that everybody's meant to have a manufactured moment of genius. I think genius is something that happens to a generation in waves. Like different generations have different geniuses, you know. We don't even know the genius of like my generation yet. They're too young for anyone to figure it out, right? Like so maybe in 100 years we'll look back at the 2010s and 20s and we won't be talking about Elon Musk or any of these other clowns we're talking about now. We'll be talking about some guy that's, you know, working really hard and, you know, who knows, doing what, God forbid, making the AI stronger. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it is it's not something that you can manufacture, and it's not something that the elites can always buy and have a monopoly on. I think a lot of times genius strikes people who tend to be sentimental and empathetic towards a greater cause and have egalitarian ideologies in some form or fashion. It always reflects the culture of their time, the political ideologies of their time. But this idea that, you know, we should do good and treat others well and maintain that in some sort of systematic way seems to be a prevailing inspiration and something in common with anyone who has the grace of pulling off a true innovation. I mean, how rare is a genius? It's not something that you just stumble upon every day.
Right.
That is true. That was a good point.
I wanted to add this, one little quote for inspiration that we too can at least be smart sometimes. Einstein said that I am not smarter. It's not that I am so smart. It's just that I stay with problems longer. And so this insistence to, you know, build on a foundation and keep going, I think this, you know, motivation to keep going is a really powerful attribute for our mental pursuits.
Well, Einstein also said that imagination is the most important thing over all knowledge. Because if you can visualize it and imagine that thing, then you can draw out the substance of it in order to understand it.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to my man Ron in the comments. What's up, Ron from New England? I love Ron.
What's up, Ron?
There is a reason why so many of them pass through the Medici. So going back hundreds of years. So and that when they finally ended the Medici, and in fact Saint Germain studied on the last years of the last Medici, that moved on to other places and then spread and disappeared. So now it's more underground. And as you said, Mark, you have these schools. But from my perception, if you have to put your son into one of those schools and pay for it and all, you are in a very low class, because these children are looked after as Jedi look for small children with midi-chlorians. They recognize them, they select them, they put them on those societies and groups as the Bohemian Grove. You can be born on the river with no shoes on your family, but if you have those traits, they will detect you and they will educate you after. So we faced, perhaps after the 19th century, perhaps 20th century, this democratization, because there is not enough of them to control as the world has grown. So they have to expand and create these elements and educate them. So, well, my point was just that if you have to pay to get that knowledge, you are very low well, way above our status, but very low in their concern to the places of control.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the result of nepotism too, like these mavericks, are want a flash in the pan, and they set their family up for 10 generations, and by the third or fourth generation, since the one man or woman and man who made it happen, I think it kind of fades and trickles. But with Skull and Bones, it does seem to magnetize a certain type of person, and maybe that's what it is. When I was younger and more optimistic, I might have thought that the Skull and Bones were the Jedi, but I'm pretty set that they're the Sith.
I believe they are neither. Okay. They're just wannabes with a very good rate of success and infiltration in the United States, because they demoted the real mystics and created their own association based on their previous knowledge. So it is a destruction of America.
I'm with Ricardo on that one. I think that they're just like rich retards jerking off in front of each other in some kind of a weird elite circle jerk, and it's just, I mean, come on.
something gay like that. Yes,
it's something super gay.
It is Pride Month.
So. Nixon, even Michael Myers and
sorry.
I'm sorry, Robbie.
No, go ahead.
Even Michael Myers and Coonroth were telling other people, quit posturing, quit saying that you are a magi, quit saying that you're an occultist, because you're not. You're doing it all for fame. You're doing it all for money. You haven't even done the processes. You haven't even done anything. And so they were calling people out then. And this is why you don't hear about them very readily, just like today. The people that kind of call people out in terms of who people really are don't really get the fame that they deserve.
Sure.
Yeah, because wasn't like Bush Jr. or whatever, he was in the Skull and Bones?
Sure.
And his dad wanted to watch him jack his tiny dick off in the coffin or whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, like, come on, this is a magician. Like, this is supposed to be some kind of like badass motherfucker. Like, give me
their
a
lodge
break.
names.
Right.
Gog and Magog.
Look, the Bush son was a failed project from the beginning.
Yeah. So he was.
He did use astronomers or astrologers to invade Iraq and knew exactly what date to do it and everything.
Do you think he did it?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, someone did it for him.
I think somebody did it for him. Somebody did it for him.
He didn't know his left hand from his right.
He's an idiot. Yeah, no.
The Bin Laden gave him a firm of oil wells there in Texas, and he managed to bankrupt them. How do you bankrupt a business that has no workers, just machines working, taking oil off the ground and selling it, and he managed to bankrupt it?
That's wild.
There's his intelligence. He was a drunk. He was a bohemian. A bohemian.
Yeah.
That's what he was.
Yeah.
So
Joe Biden
and you
is
see his
nothing
face
to-
when the guy gets near him and says it's done. You see his face. He was more frightened than the people that were on the street seeing the towers falling down.
You're talking about Bush Jr., right?
Yeah.
You're talking about, he's such a freaking idiot. And it's like, I don't know, guys. All I know how to do is jack off in a coffin in front of my daddy. Like, this guy's a magician. Give me a break.
I was going to say, though, Senior,
that's
him
the
on the
thing.
other hand, I could see
Bush
him
Senior
being
is a
into-
different story.
Senior, yes.
I will agree with you on that.
That's the thing. Think Jill Biden and Joe Biden. The U.S. presidency, it's had many handlers behind the scenes at different points with different presidents. And George Bush Jr. is just a failed attempt at giving his father the presidency that he barely had. I mean, what was it, like less than 4 terms that he was president, or less than 4 years? I think it was just 1 term. But and
who was the person that was a constant between all those people? Who was in all of those governments? I don't know the name because I am not American. But thank you.
Oh, Rumsfeld,
George Bush Sr. was vice president for 8 years under
and CIA
Reagan.
before that.
And CIA before that. So technically, he's been in the halls of power
And
at least 12 years.
Was in Dallas the day Kennedy was assassinated as well.
Good point.
Pretty
I forgot about that.
They like to watch. They like to watch.
Prescott Bush, the granddaddy of Bush.
The Prescotts.
Company that was making profits off of the Nazis.
Yeah, the Silverado Loan Company. They were financing, the Nazis.
He was a banker. One could argue that the Bush boys have been bankers for these unsaid and unknown characters that are really behind the scenes making moves, but they're like the bankers for the boys.
Yeah.
And it's said that the Bush name is not their real last name.
No.
Is it German?
Yeah.
Are they German? They are. Okay. Well, and one of the moms, right, is a tranny, supposedly Crowley's kid, right?
Barbara Bush.
Barbara
looks just like him.
Yeah. She's got something hiding under her bush, and it is a penis.
Well, you can say the same for the wife or man of Obama. So
Oh yeah, 100.
And the French president. I mean, how many are there?
Yeah.
Grown.
Is it like a ritual that they have to go through or something?
The tranny lovers.
That's what
it is.
I
think that they're more hermetic. That's the Quicksilver Man. That's just one iteration, right? Like you don't have to believe that is the hermetic person, but obviously there's a group of people that do that think that that's the way to be. Polarities.
Now,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Let me tie this in real quick, right? So, as far as the androgynous aspect, when you go back to Mother Kibbley and Addis, Mother Kibbley was transgender, but basically it was on the 22nd day of March, being 322, right, that a pine tree was cut in the woods and brought into the sanctuary of Kibbley, where it was treated as a great divinity, and the duty of carrying the sacred trees was entrusted to the Guild of Tree Bearers. And the Tree Bearers are the Zimmerman as far as ties into Germany. So when you follow this back, Addis and Kibbley are the birth of this mystery cult. Addis is where you get that Phrygian hat, that Saturnalian hat. And so this ties all the way through Germany and around when you follow the Russell Trust, basically being the opium smugglers that came in and set up shop in the United States, Georgetown University. So
I think
Yale with the Skull and Bones. Yeah.
I think what sums it up is at some point in time, they no longer needed that these people be actual masters as the old ones were. So they just need normal people that could be indoctrinated, manipulated, puppeteered,
Faces.
and that's how we got the world we have today. So,
all right.
I agree with that.
I think if you guys don't mind, since it's it's already almost 2 hours in, I think we'll probably just wrap it up here too.
sure.
Mark, that was great. That was awesome. Thank you so much, man. We'll definitely have to get you on something else.
Yeah, Nick, you're the best. I really appreciate how this turned out, and yeah, awesome to be on the show after all the tumult. But I love it. That's how things. The best friends are made through some hard times sometimes. But I'd love to join you guys all again in the spirit of what we were just talking about to get into the Skull and Bones topic or whatever else comes up that's interesting. So yeah, love it. It's awesome to talk to all of you. And I put my email in the chat. So if any of you want to get in touch with me to do a one-on-one pod as well, that's also on the table for any of you. I'd love to see you all for a one-on-one podcast, because that's typically how I do my podcast, is one-on-one. But yeah, awesome stuff. My family thinks I'm crazy. The name of the podcast and a true statement. Find me on Spotify, Apple, all the podcast apps. And again, Nick, thanks for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, no,
I usually say that it's true, but it has nothing to do with the rest.
But thank you, Mark. No, thank you very much for coming on, man. Again, it was, it's been it shouldn't have been this long. It took 4 years, a little too long, but we got you here. And again, besides me and you, the rest of the rejects, I think, we made some magic tonight. I think this was a really good episode. I think we talked on about a lot of stuff. I think we touched on a lot of different areas like polymaths would, which is why I had people on the show. So, thank you for making it happen. And it was your topic. I thought it was a kick-ass, definitely, and an occult rejects show. So I appreciate you for coming on. Jules, again, I thank you for jumping on, man. I appreciate it. That's what's up. And I thank you, Robbie, Ricardo, Julia, Ethan, Headless, Jin, and Lisa. I thank you all for coming on, and everybody in the chat. That's what's up. There was a lot of people on there from multiple areas that weren't mine. I tried to show some of your chats. Thank you very much. It was awesome to see all you here. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.